Here's a throw by Merton. It is a collision at the plate. And Pierzynski not only bangs into Barrett, bangs onto the plate, and here they go.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to this episode of the Crosstown Baseball Podcast. My name is Kevin Sullivan, and alongside me is my Sox fan compatriot, Matt Cannon. Matt, how are we doing this week?
As good as can be after an 0-3 start, but hanging in there.
It's a rough start, but you know what? That's why it's a 162 game season, and there's plenty of baseball left to play. So hopefully they can turn it around. Not so great for my Cubs either. Only winning 1 of 3 against the Nationals, but we'll get to that in a little bit here. So this week we will start with the White Sox since we started with the Cubs last week. So I will go ahead and turn it over to Matt to give a recap of the first week of the season for our Southsiders.
Okay, well, as I said, 0-3 against the Brewers. Not super unexpected, but leave it to the White Sox to find ways to lose in frustrating manners. Because if they went 0-3 and each game was a close game or something to that matter, I'd still be feeling pretty good. But of course, opening day, we lose by double digits. And then the third game of the season, we are up, I think, at 1.7-2. And I was not able to actually watch the game. I was able to just check the score. So I saw it was 7-2 in like the fifth inning or so. And I was feeling pretty good. And then, of course, an hour or so later, I checked again and we lost, or we were losing at that point, 9-7. So that's fun. That's what we call a White Sox loss there.
Why is it that they can't win when I want them to win and beat the
against
Brewers and help us out?
Yeah. Well, listen, as we discussed last week, the Brewers are a good team. And I mean, yes, the White Sox are not a good team, but it still takes a lot of talent to have a comeback like that. And when you have Christian Yelich, old man Christian Yelich at this point, come off the bench and hit a go-ahead home run, it's exciting for them and frustrating for us. And by the way, that was not off of a rookie reliever. That was Anthony Dominguez. So one of our big free agent acquisitions of the year. So that's fun.
That's working out well so far. I did see that.
Great.
I did see that Pat Murphy, the manager of the Brewers, did say that he thinks the White Sox are going to be a force to be reckoned with.
I saw that too. I wish I could see what he is seeing. I trust Pat Murphy's baseball knowledge more than my own, so I really hope he's right and not just being a polite neighbor to the north, or we empathize with this White Sox team because we are also Cubs rivals type thing. But we will see. I like that. Now, the positives of the week, Murakami, obviously. 3 home runs, 3 games. You already have some like top baseball writers talking about like, oh, was everybody wrong on him? It's a 3-game sample size, and we will see where it goes. It is exciting though. You can tell the team is really excited for him as well. And then Colson Montgomery, grand slam in game 3, off to a decent start. If he can show some pop that he showed last year and not have a sophomore slump, I think we're in really good shape with him. So that was, there were positives this weekend.
Yeah,
but
I do think with Murakami, he had a great start for sure. But I think with any player like that, especially the ones who come from Japan, I do think it takes at least a season to see how well they do. Because the pitchers are gonna make adjustments to him, and I think the ultimate key to success is can he then make the counter adjustments to the adjustments they make and keep this going. So it'll be curious to see how that unfolds throughout the year.
Absolutely. And we've seen that with tons of, whether it be Japanese, imports, Cuban imports, because they have been used to playing in a different league, and we know Major League pitching is more adaptable, more challenging, and some excel. Jose Abreu had a long, distinguished career before he fell off with the Astros, sadly. And then I'm thinking of like actually the last Japanese player that the White Sox had, ironically, was Kosuke Fukudome, who
Former Cub legend.
yeah, and he was, I mean, he was with the White Sox at the very tail end of his career, but he was one that had promise but never really fully adapted to major league pitching.
It's
I will
wild
never
that it's wild that he only retired from baseball completely last year, I think. He
is
was still
that
playing in
true?
Japan.
That's
Yeah.
crazy. Wow.
Yeah.
But yes, I like remember his like one season on the White Sox, and I think he was cut like midway through the season too.
Yeah.
I want to say it was like 2012. But no, there. So those are the positives going into our next series. I think it, again, if they're just losing, it's one thing. When they're losing kind of embarrassingly, that's when you get deflated.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, in the last 4 years, that has just been the average White Sox loss. It feels like.
Pretty
So
much. Wasn't one of those like
I
a 14-2 loss this
that was
weekend?
opening day, my friend. Yeah.
Yep.
Opening
Great way to
day.
start the season.
Yeah. Shane Smith struggled, and he worries me a bit. He had a really great season last year for the most part. Second half, he had a lot of struggles. And then he pulled it together. I think like the last month of the season, his last like 4 to 5 starts were really solid again. Um, he did not have a good spring training. And as we talked about last week, I never want to worry too much about a spring training. I know pitchers are trying different things and not like trying to be the best they can be. That is the time to experiment and to retouch some of your tools. But yeah, opening day worried me a little bit. Anthony K, game 3, he looked actually pretty good. So and it was just the bullpen that let him down. So there are going to be some positives, but we'll see. I am hoping we go 1-3 over the next week. So like I hope we can get a win before we get to 0-4. Um, and then other than the actual games of the White Sox, we do need to discuss the very unfortunate, especially the timing of this, is that the greatest White Sox player of all time, Frank Thomas, and one of my personal, player heroes, is suing his former team, the Chicago White Sox.
He
Um,
is.
from what I have gathered, and I know there is a whole long legal document detailing everything, but from what I have gathered is that he is not happy that his name and number is being used on new jerseys, so like the new City Connect jerseys.
Mhm.
Now, he is also suing, um, it's not Majestic, Fanatics,
Fanatics.
uh, Fanatics, because that is
Yeah.
who is uh, making the jerseys, and I mean that's who is running the Chicago White Sox team store and all that. Um, the speculation, though, is that this lawsuit is just the tip of the iceberg in his frustrations with his former team and Jerry Reinsdorf. We all know how many issues he had with former GM Kenny Williams. Some totally warranted, some not so warranted. It has always been a rocky relationship since he left in after 2005. But it seemed to be getting better because he
Hmm.
was doing pre and post game for a few years. He did not make the transition after NBC Sports Chicago dissolved, so he did not make the transition to the new network. But and then of course there was the controversy this past February when the White Sox posted a post for Black History Month, describing like certain first players with the team, and it did omit Frank Thomas, and he made his frustrations known. And then this lawsuit comes pretty soon after that. Um,
Yeah.
it's going to be one of those things that I don't think this is fully repaired until Jerry Reinsdorf does not own this team anymore. And after that happens, I hope Ishaba welcomes him with open arms and he's thrown out the first pitch, and it makes me sad, and it's embarrassing, and it's also not surprising. When I saw it, my reaction was like, well, that was bound to happen sooner or later.
Yeah,
Um,
pretty much, pretty much. I think it's, I'm not a White Sox fan, as we know, but I am a Bulls fan. And, the Bulls and the White Sox are both owned by Jerry Reinsdorf. I do think it is a reflection of his ownership because the Bulls, they're not necessarily on the greatest terms with their two best players in franchise history, who are Michael Jordan and Scottie Pippen. They're like, their numbers are retired, like when Derrick Rose's number was retired a few months ago, they sent videos that were played on the center scoreboard, but they weren't there, and I just think that is all you need to know about how Jerry Reinsdorf runs these teams. It doesn't seem like he cares about keeping a good relationship with his franchise's stars. And yeah, like you said, like this was only a matter of time with Frank Thomas. I did, I remember him being on NBC Sports Chicago. I was surprised when he didn't make the jump to CHSN. But it is interesting how it's just the relationship has just completely dissolved, Yeah, like he was the analyst for them at one point. I think they retired his number during that time, right? And he was there. Um,
oh yeah, I mean, and he's
yeah.
been around. The only time I have met certain celebrities throughout my life, whether it be after seeing them on shows in Broadway and stuff. Frank Thomas is the only one I was completely starstruck, and my dad loves telling this story because we went to a White Sox game, and it turns out we had the wrong tickets. We had tickets for the next night, and
Oh no.
so they, which is terrible. By the way, this happened at a Cubs game too. The White Sox people could not have been more helpful. The Cubs people essentially told us to go eat bricks. Um, so just so you are aware. But
Yeah, of course. You
um,
just had to throw that in there, didn't you?
it was, we were talking about it when it was happening because this all happened within a year of each other. I remember.
Okay.
So we went to the main ticket office and they exchanged our tickets, no problem. And then they told us we can take this elevator up to our seats because we were in the upper deck. And we get into the elevator, and before the doors close, this hulking giant gets in. And I remember thinking, like, who the hell is this? And it was Frank Thomas. And this was probably like 2015. So, what, 5, 6 years after he retired. And I just couldn't say anything. I was just so shocked at like what was happening. So it was actually my dad who said, like, hey Frank, like they could still use you out there. And I think he was either just elected to the Hall of Fame or was about to be elected to the Hall of Fame or something like that.
Mhm.
And his response to my dad was, I can still hit, I just can't run. And
I
that was
believe
the only
it.
and that is the only time I was like truly starstruck. So that was a special moment for me. And so yeah, this makes me sad
You
about.
know what's funny is I also have a Frank Thomas elevator story,
Oh wow,
which is very funny. Yeah.
fantastic.
Yeah, right. So I went to a Cubs White Sox game. I don't even know. This must have been like 2011, 2012, maybe. It was a while ago. It was definitely before you met him. And I'm there. I forgot who I was there with, but I was wearing a Cubs jersey. And the accessible entrance to Rate Field is probably the same elevator that you
I
used.
assume it's the same one. Yeah.
Yeah, and sure enough, we get in there and all of a sudden Frank Thomas comes in and it's like, wow, this guy is massive.
Yeah.
He's a large human being. He was nice, he just said hello and I felt so awkward just sitting there in my wheelchair wearing a Cubs jersey in front of probably the greatest White Sox player of all time. So it's very ironic that we both met Frank Thomas in an elevator.
In the same elevator, it sounds
In the
like.
same elevator. Yeah,
Yeah,
that is pretty
that's
wild.
that's pretty wild.
But I do hope they can mend this relationship. For as a sports fan, I want any team to be, in touch with their history and have a good relationship with their stars. I think that's necessary for, inviting him back to throw out a first pitch or to interact with the fans. I mean, I know he's got to be the greatest White Sox player in our lifetime. He's probably the best White Sox player ever.
I would say
Maybe
so.
Minnie Minoso is up there. I don't know who else you would put up there with Frank Thomas.
No, I mean Frank Thomas is I think the greatest White Sox player of all time. I don't even think that's a big debate amongst White Sox fans.
Yeah.
yes, you would have Minnie Minoso on the Mount Rushmore, but like it's Frank Thomas. And I agree with you, by the way, and you and I have talked about, and I know we're going to get to the Cubs, but like we have had conversations about, Sammy Sosa and him reuniting with the Cubs. And obviously the history is far more complicated there with, alleged steroid use and prior ownership and how he actually left the team. But it made me very happy to see him back at Wrigley Field because growing up, even as a White Sox fan, but growing up in Chicago, you could not be anywhere without seeing Sammy Sosa jerseys and just being aware of him and watching his home run reels. And so, yes, it is important for these teams to maintain relationships with their former stars because they're only going to play for, a lot of these guys will play like less than 10 years or, 10 or, the most 15, and then it's over. But the people that grew up watching them, it means the world to them.
Mm-hmm.
So, yes, this is embarrassing. So I hope it can be settled out of court, but it will not truly be over until Jerry Reinsdorf is no longer the owner. And then we will see. I hope we can get a resolution then.
I would agree with that. I would agree. Could you imagine if the White Sox had never traded Sammy Sosa to the Cubs and they had Sammy Sosa and Frank Thomas in the middle of their order in their primes? That would have been insane.
It would have been insane, and it's fun to think about, truthfully.
Mm-hmm.
All right, to finish up the White Sox, Kyle Teel is moving along in his injury. He should be back with the team within a month, which is really exciting. Hopefully he's not rushing back. There is a history of White Sox players, I think, rushing back through hamstring injuries. And you know what? We have Edgar Caro. Reese McGuire is with the team now. Like, I just want him to take as much time as he needs, and hopefully he will. Speaking of Reese McGuire, which we talked about, they gave a major league deal to him last week. They outrighted Corey Lee, and he accepted his assignment to AAA, which makes me happy. So he is not on the 40-man at the moment, but he is a really good piece of catching depth. You kind of feel bad for him. He's been with the team for a while. He used to be a pretty high prospect in the Astros organization, and he's had moments of stability and shows some signs of life, but it's not really been what anybody wanted. So maybe he can go to AAA and get his act together. But yeah, once Kyle Teel is healthy, I don't know what happens to Reese McGuire. Maybe they do carry a third catcher so that they can alternate DH between Teel and Caro, especially if they want to not have Teel catch all the time after a spring injury. So yeah, I mean, it's good depth to have. But anyway, that's really it in White Sox world. I hope next week we'll have a bit of a happier report.
Hopefully, it's got to happen at some point. I thought I saw. Didn't they give Edgar Caro Corey Lee's number? I thought I saw that he switched numbers.
That was weird. Yeah, and it happened like it. Yeah. Because I think I saw a tweet from someone being like, I thought Corey Lee was not on the team anymore because they were like in the stands at Milwaukee, and then it was Edgar Caro, and so that's a little odd to me.
I feel like that's not a good sign for Corey Lee and his future with the White Sox.
So, and the fact that it was a fellow catcher of his too is even more interesting. So, yeah, we'll see.
Yeah, well, it's a long season, but we'll see how it goes for the White Sox. But no, that was a good report on week one. So now we'll turn it over to the Cubs. Their week one recap. Alex Bregman has come as advertised. He hit 2 home runs in the game yesterday. Also went back to back with Ian Happ at one point, so that was really nice to see. It's funny because the Cubs third baseman only had 1 homer in the first half of last season, and they already have 2.
Wow, that's actually insane.
Yeah. So, getting more production out of that spot is really huge for the Cubs' success. Disappointing series to begin the year, losing 2 of 3 to the Washington Nationals, who I don't think are going to be that good this season. They don't have much of a rotation. So kind of a slow start, but I feel like that's pretty typical of the Cubs. I don't know why, but they always seem to get off to a slow start every year. Maybe it's that adjustment going from the nice weather in Arizona to the freezing cold in Chicago. Although the
Well, and
weather,
opening day was particularly cold. I
yeah,
remember too. I actually wanted to mention and ask, like, you and every other Cubs fan makes fun of the White Sox for attendance.
yeah,
You know, the attendance opening day was not great for the Cubs. I saw some
yeah.
photos and everything. Now I know a lot of it has to do with weather, but like, what's your would you stay at even if they were losing and it's cold, but it's opening day, man. It's opening day of baseball. It's a magical day. Would you stay at the game?
Uh, I've been to opening day at Wrigley, and I will say it is fun in terms of the pageantry and all that. But man, if it's cold, it's just brutal because you're right by the lake right there. And it's just not necessarily the funnest time. I would have liked to have seen a fuller Wrigley Field. Um, I don't blame fans for not wanting to go because it's just the weather is just not great. But that being said, like, the first game of the season, it's been a long off season. We obviously the Cubs have made some good signings and acquisitions with signing Alex Bregman and trading for Edward Cabrera. I would have liked to have seen more people there, but I don't blame them. And it's also on the scheduling too. I think opening day, and hopefully this will become more of a thing once MLB expands at some point and the American League and the National League are even in terms of the number of teams. I think opening day should always be a division rival. The White Sox should play like the Twins or the Guardians or the Tigers or the Royals. The Cubs should play, ideally the Cardinals or Brewers, I would say, but the Reds or Pirates would also be good. Or whoever, is in their division once MLB expands and realigns, which I do think will happen at some point. I like you had interleague matchups, which was fine. The Yankees and the Giants, for instance. That's a good historic rivalry because the Giants used to be in New York. But, imagine if that was Yankees Red Sox. I just think there would be more of a buzz for that. I think people would be more inclined to go to that game. Cubs fans, are they inclined to sit out in the freezing cold to watch the Cubs play the Washington Nationals, who could arguably finish last in their division this year? It's a tough sell. I can't say I blame people for not wanting to be a part of that. It just could be better, I think, in terms of scheduling, and I hope that's something that they keep in mind in future seasons. But it was a little bit of a slow start to the season for the Cubs. The offense looked okay at times. Obviously, they're missing Seiya Suzuki in the lineup. I will say I watched the game yesterday, and I do have some concerns about Shota Imanaga. He, I think he's got good stuff, but man, he cannot keep the ball in the park. And, this is his walk year. He's a free agent after this season. I just don't know if I necessarily see him having a long-term future with the Cubs. And even when like Justin Steele returns at some point, does that bump Imanaga further down the rotation? The Cubs do have other options that they could use, especially in like AAA. They have Javier Assad and Jackson Wiggins, who's a top prospect. So, I'm a little concerned about the pitching to start the year. And obviously, they'll make tweaks as they go. But what wasn't seeing a lot of great stuff from them yesterday, and against a team like the Nats, it's just a little disappointing. But we'll see as they head into their series here with the Angels, who I would say are another easier opponent, so to speak. They're definitely, I don't think they're really competing for the division this year, but any team with Mike Trout in its lineup could be potentially dangerous, even if he's not
He had
quite
a
as
he
effective.
had a hot opening series too,
He
which I know
did.
a lot of people were mentioning.
Yeah, he did. So, the Angels they're tough, any team with Mike Trout in the middle of its order is gonna be tough. So, we'll see, I'm trying to see, let's see, who do they have? They have Oh, Edward Cabrera is going to make his first start this week, so I'll be curious to see what he does. He doesn't have great numbers in his career, but I think that's mostly because he played for the Marlins prior to this. But he is a good strikeout pitcher, and I mean, the Cubs gave up a lot to acquire him, and we'll get to that later in this episode too. And I just want to see if it's a good return or not. So hopefully the Cubs can get it going here against the Angels this week, and then later on this week they will play the Cleveland Guardians. So I know you'll be rooting for us.
Yeah, as you know, I am not a Guardians fan. Yeah, so the Sox are playing the Marlins next, who had a really hot start. So I know we'll get to that too. So yeah, we'll it'll be an interesting week for both teams for sure.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And then some off the field news too for the Cubs this week, a little bit more positive than Frank Thomas suing the team for the White Sox.
Yeah.
But the Cubs are actually spending money. Over the past week, they signed both Pete Crow Armstrong, their center fielder, and shortstop Nico Horner to big 6-year extensions each. Nico's comes with a full trade clause, a full no trade clause. Sorry about that. PCA, he looks like a budding superstar. Obviously, he had a rough second half last season, but I do think he'll be able to turn that around, and his defense is top notch. I think these are both really good moves for the Cubs. It seems like they're switching their philosophy a little bit. The guys from the 2016 team, really none of them were extended. Javi Baez, Chris Bryant, Anthony Rizzo, Kyle Schwarber, they were all jettisoned off at certain points. So it is refreshing to see that the Cubs are investing in their young talent, and they have a nice core here that I will be around for a while at Wrigley Field. The PCA news was kind of expected. He had kind of hinted that he wanted an extension. I honestly didn't think they would extend Nico Horner right now,
That
but I'm
one
really glad
surprised
they
me
did.
for sure.
Yeah, same. I really didn't see that coming so early in the season, but he's a great second baseman. He's top notch defensively. He has one of the best fielding percentages in baseball. I know he has a pretty high. I forgot what the metric was, like B WAR or something like that. It was like PCA, Nico Horner, and Bobby Witt are like the top three.
That's
So,
pretty
keeping
good
Nico
company.
around. What?
That's pretty good company.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. So he's a guy that I think you really want to hang on to. He was drafted by the Cubs. He's a homegrown guy. He seems to really like being on the team, and he's a good clubhouse guy. He just seems like he's got a good head on his shoulders, and I do picture him taking more of a leadership role in the clubhouse, especially because after this season the Cubs could be losing a few big name guys. We already talked about Shota Imanaga, but Seiya Suzuki is a free agent. Ian Happ, Matt Boyd. There could be some turnover on this roster after the season, and I expect Nico Horner to kind of step into that role of being a clubhouse leader. So I'm really excited to see both of them extended and sticking around for a long time. And it's honestly nice to see that the Cubs are doing business a little bit differently than they did under the Theo Epstein era, and they're finally spending some money because it
Well,
seemed like for a while.
I would hope that they are seeing something from these guys that, I mean, because as you and I talked about last week about how like the 2021 White Sox team, like, were almost all out of baseball a few years later. I mean, it wasn't that dissimilar with the 2016 Cubs. I mean,
Mhm.
Kyle Schwarber being the one obvious exception to that rule, but like, Anthony Rizzo had a few good years after, but was never the superstar.
2016 was his peak
Yeah,
statistically.
Bryant's, of course, everyone talks about how he fell off, and even before he went to the Rockies, even when he was still with
Hmm.
the Cubs, he was never that player again.
Yeah.
Baez always struggled, and now I mean, the Tigers gave him that nice contract. I know he had like an okay year last year compared to other years, but he's still a shell of what he was. So, I mean, you know, I remember you and other people being frustrated that these guys were not being extended, that they were being traded away, and then it kind of made sense. So I would
Yeah.
hope that whatever analytics, division that the Cubs have sees Nico Horner and PCA and sees that, sees something in them that they maybe didn't see in these other guys, and are proven right. I, I like teams spending money. It needs to happen. And
Yeah.
and not Dodgers level with Kyle Tucker, but to keep your players happy, I think it's important. So yes, I like to see this from them.
Yeah, absolutely. You know who also has had a surprisingly decent career from that 2016 core? He was more of a bench player at that point, although he played a decent amount because Schwarber was injured. Is Jorge Soler? He's actually carved out a decent career for himself, which is surprising
He
because
had
I
like
did
what
not really see
48 home
that.
runs with the Royals for a year or something like that. But I think that was his peak. Has he been good since that year?
I think he's one of those guys. He always puts up, anywhere from like 25 to 30 homers. I think he's more of a DH at this point, a full-time DH. But, compared to some of these other guys, he's had staying power. I know he's on the Angels now. So I guess we'll see him in this upcoming series at Wrigley Field. When he first burst onto the scene, like he looked awesome. Like I was like, wow,
I
this guy's
remember.
gonna hit. This guy's gonna hit, 50 home runs a season. And it didn't quite turn out that way. I think he really got squeezed out because of other guys who came up. I mean, the Cubs had such a plethora of talent in 2016. We thought, oh my God, we're going to be amazing for the next decade. But obviously, it didn't work out for him. He was traded to the Royals by the Cubs for Wade Davis
Oh,
in
that's
that
right.
that offseason. Yeah, because the Cubs needed a closer because Aroldis Chapman went back to the Yankees. You
That
know,
was a good move for them because Davis was pretty good for you guys that year.
Yeah, he had
And
like that one good season. His career kind of fell off after that. I think he was kind of declining as well. But yeah, it is interesting to see how that's all panned out. Obviously, you feel really bad for Chris Bryant. I think with him, it really is a health thing at this point. He has some degenerative back condition. And I honestly don't know if we'll ever see him on a field again. I do think he's going to have to medically retire at some point.
I
I
mean,
know,
I do feel bad for him, but he gets to cry all the way to the bank too with the
right,
Colorado Rockies money.
right. That's true. No, he got paid. He got paid. But you never want to see someone's career end like that. And I mean, he looked awesome at the beginning. I really thought he was going to be a future Hall of Famer. I mean, he just looked so good. But 2016, kind of like with Rizzo, was his peak as well. And he was never quite that MVP caliber player after that. But enough about the nostalgia. Seiya Suzuki, we briefly mentioned him, so I'll just give a little bit of an update on him. He was doing running drills in the outfield before yesterday's game, and I did see that it looks like he's going to go out on a rehab assignment soon. So hopefully he'll be returning to the Cubs lineup in the next few weeks here. Right now, they've been largely playing Matt Shaw in right field to start the season, who's looked okay. He actually made a really good catch. I think it was on opening day. A ball that looked like it was about to go over his head, but he managed to jump at the last minute and catch it. But he's obviously not the everyday right fielder. Seiya's bat, I think, really lengthens that order. So getting him back will be a really big addition for the Cubs. And in addition to that, they also placed Justin Steele on the 60-day IL to start the season as he rehabs from Tommy John surgery, which he had last April. I expect he'll be back sometime in late May, early June. Again, like with Kyle Teel, you don't want to rush these things, especially with Tommy John, because you've seen it before where a guy comes back and all of a sudden they redo the same injury. So, well, it'll be good to see Justin Steele back again at some point. Hopefully, he can regain his form and become the one or the two in the rotation. But some good things happening on the injury front as well. So now that we've talked about the Sox and the Cubs, we can turn our attention to MLB as a whole. We've now had one series of the new ABS, the Automated Ball Strike Challenge System. I'm a fan of it so far. I do think it's good for the game just to get the calls right, when you can. It's been interesting to see how different players are using it and also how different umpires are reacting to
I was
it.
going to say, who's not a fan is CB Buckner.
Is CB Buckner? Yes. CB, God, he is. I don't know how he's still an umpire. He's definitely moved into the category of worst umpire in the league. He had a game this past weekend where I think he was in Cincinnati for that series, and Eugenio Suarez was at the plate, and he challenged two consecutive pitches, and they were both overturned. And you could tell like CB Buckner was getting annoyed by it.
Oh, yeah,
Um,
you sent me the clip, and it, I mean, you could the look on his face. To me, I was like, well, all right, ABS has won me over. If you can make
yeah,
CB Buckner's face look like that, I'm all for it.
yeah, exactly. And then there was one, I forgot what series it was, but the umpire, he forgot to turn his mic off and he was like, "Oh, I hope this gets overturned." So it's interesting to see how everyone's reacting to it and how different teams are utilizing it. Again, I think it's great for the game. I'm glad that it's not every pitch, but I do think having some recourse is good. There was also a moment, I forgot again which game it was, but the batter wanted to challenge, but he didn't challenge it quickly enough. So the umpire said he couldn't do it. So that's also something for these guys to keep in mind is like if they want to challenge, they have to do it pretty much right away.
And I believe
Um,
we saw our first manager ejection too. I think it was Derek Shelton,
yes, yes, Derek
who
Shelton did get
argued after a
ejected.
challenge, and which is, I think I saw the comparison. It's like arguing with the ATM when it says that you have no money.
Hmm. Yeah,
Like there's
basically.
nothing you can do at that point.
Basically. I think the next iteration of this that we'll see is a challenge for check swings. What
That
do you
would be
think?
really good because I think check swings, that is like the biggest, like it depends on the umpire.
Yeah.
You will see check swings, and one umpire will call it a swing and one will not, and there has to be some regulation there
I think
because
that was another CB Buckner moment actually this past weekend with Trevor
I'm
Story.
sure it was. Check swings are like sometimes the most frustrating thing because, or then sometimes the home plate umpire will just call it without even appealing to the base umpire, and like it's maddening when
Yeah.
you're on, especially when you're on the bad end of whatever happens. But yes, I agree that should be the next general step for this ABS system.
Yeah. And I think that's a rule that they should make that a rule that every check swing call has to be called by the first or third base umpire rather than the home plate umpire.
I
Because the home
agree.
plate umpire, yeah, the home plate umpire is focused on calling it a ball or a strike. And now with the ABS system, they're probably even more focused on that because they don't want to get the call wrong. Because I'm sure MLB is keeping track of all this, of which umpires are having pitches overturned more than others. I think it would be smart for MLB to be like, okay, all check swing calls have to be appealed to the base umpire and just let them handle it. Because they're just not handling as much. They can see much more clearly whether the swing was checked or not.
I completely agree, and I think that would be a great change. And it makes so much sense that it wouldn't surprise me. It's going to take 5 years to implement it.
Of course, baseball can't do anything quickly, as we
No,
know. Yeah. So we're fans of the ABS system so far. It'll be interesting to see how it progresses throughout the season. Another thing that happened this past week in the first week of the season was Netflix broadcasting their first MLB game, which was the opening night game between the Yankees and the Giants out in San Francisco at Oracle Park. It was decent for the most part. There was a little bit too much advertising of Netflix, just different things. Like they had Bert Kreischer there, which was cool, but then like they had him on a kayak in McCovey Cove and like he was just like talking about his Netflix show and it's like, okay, we don't care. We're here to watch baseball and I think they need to tone down the theatrics a little bit and not just make it like a giant commercial for Netflix's different shows. I know they had like one point where they had someone planted in the crowd and like they caught a baseball and then they were like, oh, catch him on blah blah blah, premiering on Netflix on blah blah blah. Just stuff like that I don't think was necessary. I did think it was kind of cool. I don't know if you saw this, how they had a bunch of drones deployed in right field and they had them shoot off these different colors to form the American flag. That
Yes,
was
that is very cool.
yeah, I've never seen that before, but that was pretty awesome. I
I,
honestly thought it was CGI at first.
I think I've only seen that at like Disney World, like
Yeah,
it fireworks shows and stuff. I think like that's like the same type of technology. So yeah, that was very cool. I
yeah,
completely agree with you about it sounded like it was a corporate Netflix synergy just advertised in one full MLB game. It just screamed of like some boardroom executive being like, well, we got to advertise this, we got to do this, we got to keep people's attention.
right,
And like, no, man, baseball. Like, just
right.
let
Focus on the game.
watch some goddamn baseball. Like,
Yeah, props to Matt Vasgersian, who was the play-by-play voice of that game, and then an opening day game the next day at Citi Field in New York. And that was like a 11 a.m. or 12 p.m. start, I want to say. So that was a quick turnaround for him.
yeah, no, that's yeah, all the way across the country. Yeah, no, I wasn't able to catch the Netflix game in its entirety, but I wanted to watch some clips, knowing we were going to talk about it. And the only besides the whole corporate synergy thing, like, I thought the quality of the broadcast was good. I think my biggest complaint is the score bug. I think it's ugly and
Yeah, it's
takes
not
up
big enough.
so much. Yeah, it just there's so much information on it that like if I didn't check it out on my like nice big TV, I'd be like, I have no idea what's happening.
Yeah, agreed. I think they need to adjust that a little bit, make it bigger. I don't think they're broadcasting something for a couple months now, if I remember correctly. They really only have like certain marquee events. They're not like a regular broadcaster yet.
So it's not like Apple TV Friday night game, or
Right.
Amazon Prime or whatever. It's just like certain games. Okay, maybe
Yeah.
not.
So they're not there. It'll be interesting to see what adjustments they make between now and then. Speaking of that Mets game against the Pirates, Paul Skeens getting pulled in the first inning of that game after 37 pitches and allowing 5 runs. Now, granted, they were not all his fault because
No,
center fielder O'Neal Cruz dropped, well, he dropped one easy fly ball and then another one just got over his head. That guy should not be playing the field. He should definitely be a DH.
yeah, yeah. Unfortunately, and I was so happy to get Skeens on my fantasy team this year. Unfortunately, they don't care who dropped balls or anything, but his ERA is something like 67 at the moment.
Yeah.
And
6'7".
oh God,
So
yeah.
sorry, I had to.
My goodness. But yeah, I was not happy when I checked that score just because uh I was very happy to get him on my fantasy team this year, and so let's hope he turns it around.
hmm Yes, hopefully he will. I'm sure he will. It might be a little bit of a hangover too from the World Baseball Classic. That happened a little bit around baseball. Matt Boyd in his opening day start, he was looking good at first, and then all of a sudden the wheels just fell off. So it
Yeah,
could be a hangover from that as well, unfortunately. So we'll see how that progresses. The Toronto Blue Jays, the defending American League champions, came out firing in their first series. They swept in their opening weekend series. Dylan Cease, former White Sox star and former Cubs prospect, had 12 Ks in his first start with his new team. The Blue Jays look like they picked up right where they left off, even without Bo Bichette in their lineup. So obviously that's something to keep an eye on. They're definitely one of the favorites, I would say, in the American League to potentially go back to the World Series and maybe win it all this year. And Vlad
I told
Guerrero
you last week
Jr.
they are my pick this year. I think they're going to be hungry all year, and yeah, they paid a lot of money for Dylan Cease. I don't. I said last week I don't necessarily. I don't know if it's going to work out, but is he going to be this good in every start? I don't really think so, but if he proves me wrong, great, because he looked really good in this first start.
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. I think, the Blue Jays are in a prime position to get back there. So it'll be an exciting team to watch. And I just like watching Vlad Guerrero Jr. I think he's just so good. Just a
He's a
pure
fun
hitter.
player. Yeah, I
Yeah,
agree.
he's good for the game. Absolutely. We mentioned the White Sox are going to be playing the Marlins here this week, and they are going to be facing former Cubs prospect Owen Casey, who was traded to the Marlins this past offseason in exchange for Monday's starter Edward Cabrera. Owen Casey had his first career walk-off homer yesterday for the Marlins. He's looking pretty good. I mean, even in his brief stint with the Cubs, you definitely saw that like he could be a really solid major league player. I was kind of sad when they traded him, but obviously pitching was a very important need for the Cubs this past offseason. So I'm excited to see how he progresses and hopefully, beats the White Sox this week.
Well, I my hope is that uh, the Marlins, who should not really be that good of a team and have started 3-0, are brought back to earth by, in my opinion, a White Sox team that should be at least on par with them, if not better. So I hope they enjoyed their magic because I'm going to predict that the White Sox actually win this series.
Okay.
You
Okay.
know, we'll see what happens, but the Marlins had their fun. Let's knock them back down to reality.
Yeah, yeah. We'll go back to that prediction next week and we'll see it. We'll see how it pans out.
You just play that clip over and over if I'm wrong.
Right, exactly. It'll just start the episode.
Yeah.
I love it. And then also, I know your favorite team, the Cleveland Guardians, Chase DeLauter had 4 home runs in their opening series, so he is leading the league currently in home runs. Only him and Murakami are two of only 4 players to have 3 home runs in their first 3 games in baseball history. It's crazy that that happened twice in the same season. But he's looking good. He's getting off to a great start for them. So a lot to be excited about here after this opening weekend.
Yeah, and again, the Guardians are always one of those teams that like they seem to always get certain players to produce for them, even if they have not produced to that level before. We will see what happens. I really don't think they're going to be that good this year. So we'll see. But yeah, if they keep that power up, they're in good shape. But I would love
Hmm.
to see again them knocked down to reality a little bit too, because yeah, as a White Sox fan, you kind of there every team in your division is a rival, but it's the Twins and Guardians that I think really get on White Sox fans' nerve, and the Royals too. So actually, and let's throw the Tigers in there too. Screw all of them.
Just every team in the
Yeah,
division.
screw all of them.
Yeah.
Yeah, we'll see if they can keep that production up. But um, that was impressive to see, even if I didn't like the outcome for the team.
Yeah, that's fair. As a baseball fan, it's cool to see when guys get off to big starts like that. So we'll see if he can keep it up this week as we move into the second week of the season. So now we've discussed MLB as a whole. We're going to get into our new segment that we're going to be doing each week called Baseball Movie of the Week, where we are going to be profiling a different baseball movie that we both enjoy. Sometimes it'll be an older one, sometimes it'll be a newer one. But this is an exciting thing that we're going to start doing here just to, expand the conversation a little bit. And I know you and I both agree that we just don't see many good baseball movies made these days. It seems like it's a bit of a lost art.
I was going to say, I mean, this will be our segment of the week until we run out because,
Right,
uh,
right.
yeah, sadly, they're, yeah, they used to be more common, but they're still kind of few and far between. But there is something, I mean, in the realm of sports movies as a whole, there is something very magical about a good baseball movie, I
Yeah.
think.
And
That
especially a
hits
good
differently.
kids baseball movie, I think.
Yes, yes. Do you want to say what movie it is?
Yeah,
Because
so on that note, we'll get into the movie for this week, which is a kids baseball movie, and we're going to be profiling Little Big League this week. Little Big League stars Luke Edwards as the title character, Billy Haywood. along with Tim Busfield as Lou Collins, who also appeared in Field of Dreams, which I'm sure we'll be talking about at some point, and Ashley Crowe, who plays Jenny Haywood, the mom in the movie. Coincidentally, she is also the real life mom of Cubs center fielder Pete Crow Armstrong, who we discussed earlier in this episode getting a contract extension this week. So may or may not have been why I picked this movie, but it's a good tie-in. So Little Big League was released in 1994. It tells the story of Billy Haywood, who inherits the Minnesota Twins from his grandfather after he suddenly passes away. Billy then names himself the manager of the Twins at just 12 years old. This was an interesting movie. You get a lot of good cameos in it. Ken Griffey Jr., Randy Johnson, Ivan Rodriguez. So you get three future Hall of Famers in this movie, along with former Cubs manager and Mariners manager at that time, Lou Piniella. It's a really well-made movie. And I find it interesting because it's very similar to another kids baseball movie that came out around that time, which I know we'll talk about in the segment in a future episode, which is Rookie of the Year, in the sense that you have a kid who becomes part of a major league team at about 12 years old. It's a little different in the sense that the kid in this movie is the manager, where in Rookie of the Year, he is a pitcher for the Cubs, ironically, one of my favorite movies. Um, but I do think
because they
that,
win the World Series at the end of that movie.
yeah, exactly. It allowed me to dream as a young child of that day. But Little Big League, it's just really well done. I think, the story is good. Is it super believable? No, not really. But I think it is aged very well. And, I think it has a lot of good messages about being a good leader and, and it's a good baseball story. What would you say? What are your thoughts on it?
This one's always been really fun because I think this is, like you said, all the actual player cameos, and not just player cameos of like that time, but like who ended up being like future Hall of Famers. Just it, it, it this is like I think the biggest like cameo fest for players, maybe like outside of the Simpsons episode, which we should actually do as a
Yeah, we
profile.
should talk about that
It's
episode.
not a movie, but
Rookie of the
totally
Year does have some cameos too. I will say that.
it does.
Yeah.
And yeah, I put this in the same category as that movie because it's like it's a kid's fantasy
Yeah.
movie, and I kind of wish there was more of them because they are just really, really fun. And obviously, it requires an extremely huge, suspension of disbelief. But it's fun. It is fun to see an innocent kid put in these positions and then succeed ultimately.
Right.
It this one has a fun cast. Obviously, Tim Busfield, who yes, he's going to be mentioned in another movie, and he's not in the best. You know,
He's having some legal issues at the
he's
moment.
got
We
some
won't get into
legal
that.
issues at the moment. So we wanted to mention that, but he's very good in this movie. No, it's. I mean, and then yeah, it's like his character begins seeing the mom. So it's like imagine a player dating a manager's mom. It's like there's so many crazy scenarios that happen
Yeah.
in this movie that it's just a fun watch. And I like
Mhm.
that you chose this first because it's it's such a fantasy, and it's about like the Minnesota Twins. I don't know how they pick teams that like are the focus of these movies. I feel like it's just like who can we get the right, like what stadium can we get to film? You know,
That's actually why. So I was looking at the trivia on IMDb while I was, putting this outline together for this episode, and it said that the team was originally supposed to be the Kansas City Royals, but they decided to switch it to the Minnesota Twins because at the time they played at the Metrodome, which was an indoor stadium, and they figured it would be easier to shoot it there.
honestly, that's a great. I mean, me having directed film and been on film sets, that's a great reason because
Yeah.
um I can see why that would be easier. And like, yeah, I know some movies, like I know Major League was written by a Cleveland Indians fan, so that's why
Yeah.
it's a Cleveland movie.
Right.
Even though I know that was filmed in Milwaukee, but we'll get to that when we get to that movie because that's one
Yeah.
of my favorites.
Yeah.
No, this is just a fun watch all the way around. I only had seen it on TV up until a few years ago. So I think there was a couple scenes that like are not shown in the TV version. And so I remember like watching it on streaming and I'm like, "Oh, I remember what scene, but I was like, I don't think I've ever seen this scene before."
Yeah.
Um but it is a really fun watch for a baseball fan, for a movie fan. Great movie to show your kids, and honestly, it does have really good lessons. It has how to be a leader even as a kid. It has how to resolve conflict, how to handle your emotions, and how to like work together as a team.
Yeah.
It's a fun movie, but it also is just like a really good watch for the whole family.
Yeah.
So yeah, I want to watch it again now.
You should, and I think it teaches kids how to stay humble too, because Billy in the movie gets a little bit cocky. He's the manager of the Twins. He thinks he's hot stuff. I think that's a good lesson for kids to learn as well. But this movie is really, in my opinion, it's a part of that early '90s golden era of kids baseball movies. It was like this and the other three. I'm sure we'll discuss at some point. Angels in the Outfield, The Sandlot, and Rookie of the Year. They all came out around the same time, and
Yep.
I would argue these movies are another reason why I'm a huge baseball fan, because they just came out at the right time. I mean, on road trips, we had a TV with a VCR in our van. These were always picked. I can't tell you how many times I've watched these movies over the years. So I think it's important to get back to that. Um, and if
I
anyone is
agree.
inter yeah, and if anyone is interested in watching Little Big League, like Matt is, you can find it available for streaming for free on Tubi, which is where I watched it last night, actually. So you can check it out there. It does have ads, unfortunately, but for the most part, I think it's uncut and unedited. So you
And,
shouldn't be
and you
missing
will
anything.
and you know this, but I will tell our listeners I am a huge, huge, huge physical media buff. I fully believe you do not physically own anything unless you are holding it in your hand. So if you love a certain movie such as this, go try to buy the DVD, Blu-ray, whatever. I don't believe there's a 4K Blu-ray released of this. That would be great.
Probably not.
If there was, I'd buy it instantly.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, streaming is very convenient, but if you love something, go get it in your hand.
Agreed. Yeah, you don't necessarily own it with streaming, unfortunately. So we're going to have a rating system here. We're going to do it out of 5 Italian beefs, is what we've decided, since this is a Chicago themed baseball podcast. So for Little Big League, I guess I'll start it off. It's a good story. It's well done. I think it's aged pretty well. Obviously, it has a lot of cameos. I'm going to give it 4.25 Italian beefs out of 5. I do think, some of it's a little corny. It can drag on at certain points, I think, but I do think the overall message is really good. The plot is really well developed. And, the casting was really good too. You have a lot of former major leaguers playing for the Twins, including former Cub Leon Durham, actually plays one of the Twins players in that movie. So, I think there's a lot of good stuff there. I think it's great to show your kids. It's definitely family friendly. So I'm gonna go with 4.25 Italian beefs out of 5. Matt, what would you give this movie?
I think, and you were talking about kind of the other two movies that are similar to this around the same time, and I know we will get to them in time, but I would say this is probably number three of those three for me. I like Angels in the Outfield and Rookie of the Year a little more. Um, like you said, it does drag a little bit. I think the overall story is not quite as it doesn't have the emotional hook of Angels in the Outfield, which and then the Rookie of the Year, because the kid is a player as opposed to the manager, I think it's just a little more fun and fantasy filled.
Hmm.
So I'm gonna give this 3.5 Italian beefs out of 5.
Okay.
Really solid watch, but not like in the plethora of like unbelievable baseball movies for me. I think it's just a really fun movie that has a baseball story.
Right. Yeah, agreed. I think it's a very entertaining watch. It's not the greatest movie in the world, but it's definitely not the worst either. Highly recommend it if you're looking for some entertainment for your kids and to have some nostalgia for 90s baseball.
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. Awesome. Well, that is our baseball movie of the week. And that, on that note, it will do it for episode 2 of the Crosstown Baseball Podcast. We really appreciate everyone tuning in. Obviously, make sure to give this video a like. If you're watching it on YouTube, give us a follow on YouTube or Spotify, where we are also available. And make sure to follow us on social media on Facebook and Instagram at Crosstown Baseball Podcast. Just go ahead and look for the logo that is set on all of our platforms. And we really appreciate everyone tuning in. And we will see you all next week for episode 3. Matt, do you have any parting words for our adoring audience?
Go Sox.
And I will end that with Go Cubs. Thank you so much for listening. We will see you all again soon. Take care, everyone.